Good afternoon, Mr. Ryan. How are you doing today, sir?
Hey, what's happening, Mike? How are you?
Doing well. So one of the topics that you and I have been talking about offline here, um, in a scenario that would help a lot of people, and it seems obvious to you and I, but in experience with dealing with clients, especially as they get down the road a little bit later on in years, that maybe have unforeseen circumstances, right? Is the benefits of home ownership and then using real estate as one of your end game assets, like a lot of people would look at their 401k or whatever kind of retirement account or savings account and things of that nature, right?
Yeah, I think as we plan, I look at this timeline and we have our working years.
Mm-hmm.
So during our working years, a lot of times we're worried about how much money we're going to stow away and
Yep.
invest so that we can live comfortably in our retirement years.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we get to retirement, we're really, really worried about how much money we have left and drawing down on it too fast so that all of a sudden now like we can't afford the care that we need, we can't travel, and life isn't exactly what we envisioned when we were in our working years. It's slightly different, and it
Yeah.
actually is more compressed because life is more expensive at that age.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times what I'm seeing now, very because of inflation and everything else that we've been kind of dealing with, is that a lot of people that didn't work with financial planners early in their working lives, and let's be honest, most of us in our 20s and 30s aren't thinking of financial planners, right? We're thinking
Yeah.
of buying our first house or getting that dream car that we want and that sort of thing, starting families, but we're not thinking about the kind of end game. And
Mm-hmm.
then end game starts to come up for us a little later in life in most cases. So we usually see people start to talk to financial planners in their 40s or 50s, sometimes not even until their 50s or 60s as they start to plan out retirement, which is in a really, really tight window.
Yeah.
It's coming up fast. And one of the areas that they tend to focus on is our 401k, our IRA contribution. So how much, dollars in assets can we stow away? Where do we put them? Are we undershooting our ability to retire? Are we over? Are we on pace? Those are the questions that come up. But real estate is not really factored in a lot of times. Most of the time, what I hear is somebody says, I want to pay my house off so that when I'm retired, I don't have that mortgage payment. Um, but the reality is, let's say the house is paid off or paid down. And if you've bought it and had really a long runway of owning it or owning a multiple real estate for a long time, chances are you have a really good equity position.
Yeah.
And so as that 401k or IRA bucket maybe starts to shrink and we have that fear around, life is more expensive today, we're pulling off that a little faster than we anticipated. Are we going to outlast, what's actually left in that bucket? The real estate asset is also, if you imagine somebody passed today, that asset would be
Yep.
liquidated, they'd sell it most likely, and
Mm-hmm.
then the heirs would get the cash. So homeowners need to look at that. And so I think when we're looking at buying maybe our first house or maybe making that move up to from the starter home to the next house,
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about this a dozen different times, but projecting out in decades, right? Look at it as an end game. See what that property potentially would be. Maybe that starter home that you have only has so much growth potential. And so your equity position on that is only going to grow so much. But if you bought that better house, that nicer one that's going to serve your family and took a little bit of a risk, maybe you just don't go buy the new car and you allocate some of those funds for that nicer home, does that thing appreciate at a much faster clip? And
Yeah.
that's what we've seen a lot of people do. And the asset, when you look at it in that context, there's a whole lot you can do. We talked at one point about reverse mortgage and things like that too.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I think you see it too on your side as well, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. And again, I think it's kind of unfortunately, it's something that people in general just don't think about going into it. And you made a good point on when you go to purchase a property, you know, by default, we just think like, okay, is this going to meet my needs right here, right now? And, how long will that meet my needs? Like, do we get a 4-bedroom house because we're going to be a growing family and we want to make sure we have room for that, right? Or like, hey, we're midlife right now and buying a new home, and should we buy a 1-story or 2-story house, right? Because we're gonna get older. But we think about that, those type of things. But to your point, we don't really project across decades on using this, as our nest egg, which most people, their home, their primary residence is their largest nest egg by far, right? And for a lot of people, they use it, obviously their cost of shelter, which we've talked about a bunch, and if they pay the house off and they no longer have a monthly expense on having a roof over their head, besides their utilities and property taxes and insurance, that's a huge benefit to them, right? But also the thing that I think just doesn't get talked about is, like if you have a client who, spouse passes away, right? And they've got the property and they're living there, but now it's too much home for them, or they lost a chunk of their income, right? But that house is free and clear, or it's, very little is owed on it. They could use that to, if they didn't get life insurance money or retirement or pension, any of that stuff, they could draw money out of that house to continue their lifestyle, should they choose to, right? But people we don't think about it that way. We don't think of our house as anything other than our shelter by default, right? And I think that we really need to change that for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people are feeling that pinch now. Like we said, with inflation just going crazy, everything else is getting so expensive. There needs to be alternative forms of, sources of income for people later in life.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
Social Security is one thing that they keep talking about, like, is it even going to exist, right? And meanwhile, everybody is having to pay into it, and they might not ever see any of that money. So, kind of a problem.
Yeah, it can be a big problem. And, I think the concern that I hear often, especially from somebody maybe just starting out, is, is it the right time for me or my family to buy this house? It feels riskier, it feels high, the market feels, rates are high, or the sales prices are high. It's because we have recency bias. We know that a house may have been 50 grand, 80 grand, 100 grand cheaper several years ago.
Yeah.
And same thing with interest rates. We know that they're, half the price or even a third of the price of what they are today, several years ago. So we have that recency bias that tells us it's too expensive. And if we only focus on, the next year or the next 2 years, sometimes we overlook the long-term opportunity. And that's the part that we're trying to drive home with this conversation, is that in the long run, it doesn't matter, if you're in your 20s or early 30s and you buy a house today, you're going to be very happy when you're retired, even if that's the only home that you ever stay in, because you just simply grab that mortgage payment, make it on time every month, and you took a 30-year loan. Well, in 30 years, that home is free and clear. So even if it's worth the same as you paid today, you're contributing and building an asset. Meanwhile, you're fixing your housing cost for the foreseeable future, right? Aside from property taxes and insurance adjustments, that mortgage, as long as you took a fixed rate mortgage, isn't going to adjust. And actually, you have a safe bet. If it gets cheaper, if rates get cheaper in the future, you just simply refinance and you can lower that down. But even if it didn't, if the rate in which you got today is the best that it ever is going to be in the next 30 years, then you win, because, it would have been higher later, right? So just looking at in that simple context right there, it's gigantic. And there's a bunch of options when we get to, those later years, let's call it 70, 80 years old. And we decide that, maybe that home no longer serves us, but we want to keep it. We want to keep it as an asset, want to rent it out. Well, guess what? There's a new income source for you. It's very similar to receiving, you've got your income from Social Security or wherever, maybe a small pension. But now that rental income comes in. Or maybe you sell the house, you take that cash event and you downsize, and then you have a sizable cash that you can draw down on as well. So there's all sorts of different things that the home can provide for you later in life. And a lot of times we're looking at it as, my housing cost is this to rent and it's this to buy, and that's my decision making. But we're skipping over all of those long-term opportunities that are right in front of us. That, when you're 70, 80 years old, you'll totally remember that. Like, I should have bought when I was 20. Like, it's easy to look back. It's really, really hard for us to look forward, especially in decades.
For sure. Well, and I think most people, our brains just aren't trained to do that yet. You know what I mean? Especially when you're at the age that you're buying your first home. Like, they don't teach you that in school.
No. So. And look, I've got the best possible seat in the house. I get to interview everybody from the person just out of high school who's all hot and bothered about buying their first house
Yeah.
to somebody who's in, really up there in age. I mean, maybe they're in their 90s, and they're telling us all about, because they love to share at that age.
Oh,
and
yeah.
they're telling us all about all the times in which they thought the house prices were too high and they missed out on this or this or this. And you hear that and you go, it's interesting, because in that moment, like the person who's 90, who back in the 70s decided not to buy for a decade because it was too expensive for them. If you go back and you could have, I don't care, pick out any house out here, what it cost you in the 70s, everybody on this call would go, yeah, I want it.
All of them.
Buying it for that price, right? Because it's way cheaper.
Yeah.
But in the moment, it felt heavy even for that person, but they didn't know what was coming down the road. And so being able to hear on my side, to hear from people that have kind of already been there, they've already traveled really a lot further down the road than you and I have, gives us like a really, really unique vantage point that we can now share with people that are getting started. And so I love those interviews, because I get to learn a lot about, what would I have done if?
Yeah.
Should I have done if? What was I afraid of and why it's BS now? Those are things that are really, really fun to kind of hear from people.
For sure. Okay, well, I think that we got that one pretty good. Next time, I think it would be good for us to talk about reverse mortgages. I know that they're not for everybody, and I know there's a lot of myth understandings around them, but they are good for some people in some circumstances, and I think that they're just an overlooked opportunity for a lot of people. So we'll check in on that next time. All right.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
No problem. Have a good one.